We have talked plenty about who is next at LSU. And my firmly held contention is can't really have that conversation seriously yet until we know how much LSU is willing to spend and who is going to be making the hire. Do you want to go spend $100 million again to lure Lane Kiffin, Dan Lanning? Or are you going to try to get a lesser deal on an up-and-coming coach? Are you going to look at John Summerall? Are you going to try to make a play for Joe Brady? Some of the other names that we've discussed. And it's impossible to know until you know who's making that hire. If it's Scott Woodward, we know. He's a big game hunter. He goes after the biggest fish in the sea. I've shared with you here, based on the information that I've gotten, believe that Scott Woodward is not going to be making this hire. I think it was very evident this weekend with Governor Jeff Landry injecting himself the manner in which he did into these conversations. A new university president set to be hired within the next several weeks. You have seen the governor start to overhaul leadership throughout the university, from Winston DeQueer, the legal counsel, last January, to now a new university president where his guy, Wade Rouse from McNeese, is likely going to be that guy, I'm told. That's certainly who the governor is pushing for. And I think that is going to extend to athletic administration as well. And they will look to hire a new athletic director. So not knowing who's making the hire makes it impossible to know, number one, what type of hire they're looking to make or how much they're willing to spend, because I don't know who's making that hire. But Paul Finebaum was on the Rich Eisen show on Tuesday and said so far the most fascinating thing that I have heard in this very short now coach search window. And it's about a guy that won the first national title here in 45 years.
Nick Saban wouldn't talk to Penn State. He wouldn't talk to Florida. But I think he would talk to LSU, at least to see what they have to offer. And by the way, sometimes you can come back and make an offer that even a man who will be 74 years old on Halloween might consider. I think it's worth thinking about. And I'm already hearing on our show down here in the South, Alabama fans saying, please tell me it's not true. Don't tell me that Nick Saban's going to LSU.
You want to talk about the most epic Bama is burning ever? Let this happen. I'm just saying. I learned long ago in this business not to speak in absolutes. So when it comes to coaching searches, I'll use this phrase that I've used forever. Believe nothing, consider everything. So I'm not believing that Nick Saban's coming, but I'll consider anything. Y'all, Ed Ogeron became the head coach at LSU. And you may look at it now with the benefit of hindsight and think, yeah, so what, he won a championship? Right. Remember the context at the time he was hired. That was an absurd, outlandish thought that LSU would hire Ed Ogeron. They did because of circumstances that unfolded the way they did. I will believe nothing. I will consider everything. As it pertains to Saban, I'll entertain the conversation. Paul Finebaum, rooted in the state of Alabama, around that university, has obviously a lot of connectivity with Nick Saban and believes he would listen. I want to remind you of this. Nick Saban, last offseason, was a guest on The Pivot with Ryan Clark, Channing Crowder, Fred Taylor. Nick Saban, Nick Saban's words, talked about his greatest regret in his career.
When I left LSU, that was probably professionally the biggest mistake that I ever made. Not because we didn't have success in Miami, because I enjoyed coaching in Miami, but I found out in that experience that I like coaching in college better because you could develop players personally, academically, athletically, and all that a little more than in pro ball.
The biggest mistake he made professionally was leaving LSU. And he has spoken for years glowingly about his time in Baton Rouge at LSU. Now, you heard also, he's about to be 74 years old next week, on Friday. He'll be 74 years old Friday. What type of contract and deal can you do for a guy that's 74 years old? Short-term, 3-year deal. Would you sign Nick Saban to a 3-year deal at $20 million a year? Would you guarantee Nick Saban $60 million over 3 years, banking that he could come in here and rebuild this thing quickly enough and rebuild culture quickly enough and maybe make a run at winning another national title? Like, is it worth that money? You're damn right it is. And I believe that they would have no problem whatsoever raising those funds. If the power brokers around LSU had the option to get Nick Saban and you had to pass the hat and raise $60 million for 3 years, done in an instant, in a millisecond, done. Nick Saban, is this McAfee or game day? Okay, this was Nick Saban on Pat McAfee talking about would he coach again.
You know, I want to stay retired, and I do not want him anywhere near Miss Terry. Because when she hears some of these numbers, she gets interested. And I ain't interested.
He said, I ain't interested. That was Saban on McAfee. They also talked about it briefly and jokingly on College Game Day this past weekend as well. Again, I don't believe Nick Saban is going to unretire. If he wanted to keep coaching, there was no reason to leave Alabama. I mean, he was an errant snap in the national semifinal away from going to the national championship where they would have beaten the crap out of Washington and won a national championship. Okay? He was an errant snap away from that on a team that Alabama fans tried to tell you was no good and Saban had lost his fastball and all that stuff. He could absolutely do it. He should have stayed if he wanted to be in it. I don't think he wants to be in it. That's the reality. It's why he left. But what would be fascinating is if Nick Saban would take Scott Woodward's call. Because remember, when Nick Saban was here the first time, of course, his agent, Jimmy Sexton, Scott Woodward was the liaison between Mark Emmert, the chancellor, the athletic director, Joe Dean at the time, and the state capitol. He was that guy that was the liaison that tied all the loose ends together. There's a decades-long relationship there and a tie to the era of when Nick was here the first time. Would he be interested if Scott Woodward's not his athletic director? I think he would be decidedly less interested, especially not knowing who would be the AD in this moment. The timing, however, works because think of how complex this decision's going to be. Your season's going to end the Saturday after Thanksgiving at the end of November. Well, you're a few weeks away from the December signing period and then the January portal. If you're interested in Lane Kiffin or Dan Lanning or possibly John Summerall, because Tulane could be in the playoff. Any team in the playoff? You ain't talking to these guys until the end of December or January. The December signing period's over. The January portal's over. And you don't have your coach in place. Solved that with Nick Saban. He's just sitting there doing TV. It's a crazy thought. A thought that I don't think is going to happen. Like, I don't think Nick Saban is coming back at 74 years old to coach LSU and be a bridge or any of that stuff. I think he's sincere when he says he wants to stay retired. But I also believe you pick up the phone and you make him tell you no. You call Miss Terry and you tell her 20, 25 million a year, whatever that number is, and see if you could get Nick Saban here for 3 years to reinstate that culture that he built, which, by the way, then Les Miles was able to build upon for the decade plus he was here, and then Ed Ogeron. Yeah. I do it in a millisecond. Believe nothing. Consider everything. Even a phone call to Nick Saban. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.